So focus refers to the focusing the attention of your listener in the conversation on particular information. This term focus in linguistics identifies the information in an utterance that the speaker communicates as the important information in the utterance. So in a simple sentence, I might say, Taro looks relieved. Relieved, right? You can hear it. Right? He finished his thesis. He finished his thesis. Well, thesis is a two-syllable word. Accent is at the end of the sentence. He finished his thesis. So far, okay? Now, if I ask a question, did Taro finish your thesis? Did Taro finish your thesis? Well, wait a minute. That doesn't make sense. Taro is writing Taro's thesis, not my thesis. So I would answer, he finished his thesis. So I'm focusing on the his because of the meaning in the conversation. Did Taro finish your thesis? He finished his thesis. So now the accent has been moved off of thesis and onto his for what's called emphatic stress or focus intonation. Taro needs to write his thesis. That's a simple sentence, accent at the end of the sentence. It's a two-syllable word, stress on the first syllable, so it's falling step intonation. Taro needs to finish his thesis. He finished his thesis. Now I'm changing the focus in the conversation to show a contrast between the first sentence, needs to write, and the actual fact, which is that no, he doesn't need to write. He finished his thesis. So now accent shifts to he finished his thesis. And again, finished is a two-syllable word. Stress is on the first syllable. So the placement of the accent lands on the stressed syllable. He finished his thesis. There's still a stress difference between thesis, but it's not the sentence accent. The sentence accent is found on finished. He finished his thesis. He finished his thesis, which is different from the first one, which was he finished his thesis. He finished his thesis. And so there's different meaning conveyed, different meaning communicated, depending on the placement of sentence accent. And this is often difficult to hear because people don't often study this early in the course of learning about English. But if you pay attention to it, you'll notice it everywhere. We use intonation all the time to direct the attention of people we're speaking to. Sometimes focus is used to identify new information in a conversation. Notice I just said new information, right? To provide focus on the word new. Right? So in a brief conversation like, where are you going? Where are you going? Right? So where is the question, but the accent appears at the end of the sentence. And this is not a yes-no question. This is a question about information, sometimes called a WH question. It begins with either where or who or what or when. In fact, even questions with the word how are included, even though how begins with an H and not a WH. But still, we refer to these WH words in WH questions, questions that ask for information. They do not have rising intonation. They have falling intonation, just like statements. The rising intonation is for yes-no questions. So in where are you going? Going. Accent is on the stressed syllable, go, of going, and it's high-low, a falling step intonation. But the answer is giving new information, right? To Boston. Boston answers the question, so Boston receives the accent. To Boston. Boston. Yeah? Then, though, the question changes the focus to where are you going? Okay? I've told you where I'm going, Now I'm changing the focus to you. So where are you going? Which is a different question from where are you going? Where are you going? Places emphasis, focus on the going, which is linked to the where at the beginning of the sentence. But in the second part of the conversation, that's old information. That's a familiar question. But now we want to change the focus to the other person in the conversation. Where are you going? An accent falls on you. Right? A different type would be like, can I borrow the car? Now, this is a question that has a yes or no answer. So it's rising intonation. Can I borrow the car? Imagine my son, we have one car, and my son wants to use the car. And so he might ask, can I borrow the car? It's a standard question. But in fact, we don't have one car. We have two cars. There's the Toyota and the Nissan. And so then the answer, the following question might not be yes or no. Even though the question that was asked was a yes/no question, it might follow up by changing the focus to which, whoops, which car. Okay, so which car? Car is old information now in this conversation. Which is the new information because I'm asking to distinguish between our two cars. So there's a shift in focus, and that's marked in English by intonation. It can be marked in other languages with grammatical endings. So one way in Japanese, for example, whether you mark a noun as a nga or a wa will influence its focus in a conversation. So in this case, can I borrow the car? Which car? Which car? The Nissan. The Nissan, right, would be the intonation patterns. Okay? So focus shift is marked by intonation in English. So consider these examples. How was your trip? How was your trip? Now that's a WH question, right? What did I say? How was your trip? How was your trip? Oh yeah, so the voice, how was your, accent goes up, but then falls during the duration of the word trip. Unfortunately, trip is a kind of short word. It ends with a voiceless stop, and it's a short vowel, I. So you don't really hear it so well, but it's, how was your trip? But spoken quickly, how was your trip? Trip. If I could slow it, how was your trip? Is what I'm saying, kind of pushed together. How was your trip? Because it's one syllable, it's a falling glide intonation. I'd like to open an account. Now, the word account is a two-syllable word, but the second syllable is heavy, so it gets a monosyllabic foot. It's the stressed syllable in the word, account. And so that's the placement of the accent. And so I'd like to open an account. The stress, the pitch goes up after a count. And it's again a falling glide intonation. I'd like to open an account. I'd like to open an account. Or the last example, now again a WH question, so also has falling intonation, but this time the word problem is stressed on the first syllable, so the placement of the accent is on problem, and you get a step, falling step intonation. What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem? Yes, no questions have rising intonation. Did you have a good trip? Did you have a good trip? So the accent goes up in both cases. The difference is whether following the rise in pitch, it goes down in a glide. How was your trip? Or whether it goes up. Did you have a good trip? Trip? I'd like to open an account. Did you open a bank account? Account? Did you open a bank account? What's the problem? What's the problem? But the yes-no question, is there a problem? Is there a problem? It's not, there's no glide. It's not problem, but just problem. So yes-no questions have rising intonation statements, and WH questions have falling intonation. If accent lands on the very final syllable, it will be a glide. If it's before the final syllable, either the penultimate, the penult, or even anti-penultimate syllables, it will be a step. Okay. So we also use focus in English to show contrast. So there's another purpose behind the placement of accent. So I might show a contrast between bad and good news in a sentence like, I have some bad news and some good news. So there are two accents. I have some bad news and some good news. If I want to distinguish two different cities called Paris, one of them's in Texas and one of them's in France. Now, Texas has two syllables, Texas. France is one syllable, so they have different accent types. I went to Paris, Texas, but David went to Paris, France. Okay? You can see they both have accent, but Texas has falling step accent, and France has falling glide. I went to Paris, Texas, but David went to Paris, France. A contrast between literature and phonetics in the next sentence. This isn't English literature, it's English phonetics. And notice the accent lands on words, and then within the word, it appears on the stressed syllable. So phonetics is stressed on the second syllable. Literature is stressed on the first syllable. So when they find themselves in the accented position in the sentence, that's where the accent gets pronounced. This isn't English literature, it's English phonetics. Or, in the contrast in the last sentence, this isn't English literature, it's American literature. And even in the case of American, the word American is stressed on the second syllable, so the accent lands on mare. Right? The letter A in American is capitalized because you capitalize it in English spelling. So the MER is the syllable with the accent. This isn't English literature, it's American literature. Well, one more time, we'll go through and practice them. If you're home alone in a room where no one's listening to you, you can loudly practice them. If you're around other people and don't want to be heard, you can just imagine saying the difference. But let's just repeat each of these. I have some bad news and some good news. Okay. I went to Paris, Texas, but David went to Paris, France. Okay. This isn't English literature, it's English phonetics. And this isn't English literature, it's American literature. Well, hopefully a few people were able to feel the difference in saying those. Okay. Now, the last example I have, I think it's the last one, we use intonational focus to correct or to contradict or to modify information in a discourse, in a conversation. So today's class ends at 5:10. And if someone wants to correct that and say, no, not 5:10, but 6:10, the contrast, you can see the correction is between 5 and 6. Today's class ends at 5:10, would be the standard expression. 10, final, falling, glide. Today's class ends at 5:10. I think it ends at 6:10. So then the focus shifts to 6:10. 6:10. It's been really nice to meet you. It's been really nice to meet you. Now, in pronouns in English grammar have a status that's different from full nouns. So that's why the you does not take the accent. It's been really nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. But when there's a contrast, then we can place the accent on the pronoun. Right? Nice to meet you. Meet is old information. Right? So the new information is the contrast between which speaker you're referring to. So it's a rather natural conversation. Oh, it's been really nice to meet you. Oh, nice to meet you. Next one. Can we fix the fax machine? Can we fix the fax machine? Taro thinks it's possible. I think it's impossible. So here there's a contradiction between what Taro thinks and what I think. Taro thinks it's possible. I think it's impossible. Now, normally the word impossible is stressed on the pos, impossible. But when we want to emphasize the contrast between possible and impossible, that shifts the focus to the prefix im. That's not word stress. That's accent on top of the word stress patterns. This is part of the difficulty, actually, when listening to English, is that even after you've learned where words get stressed, in some cases, the normal stress patterns get changed. We saw last week with stress reversal because of eurythmy, and now we see with change in focus that there will be a different placement of the pitch accent. So here I want to correct some information. Dante wrote Hamlet. Dante is a famous Italian author. Hamlet is a famous play, but in fact it wasn't Dante. Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. So if I want to correct the information, that receives the accent. Dante wrote Hamlet. No, Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. Or smoking decreases your risk of heart disease. No, smoking increases your risk of heart disease. So normally the first syllable in decrease or increase doesn't have stress. But when it becomes the focus, then the focus gets on top of the word stress patterns. So smoking decreases your risk of heart disease. I want to correct that and say, no, smoking increases your risk of heart disease. Or the Taj Mahal is in Thailand. The Taj Mahal is in Thailand. Accents at the end of the sentence. But now I want to correct it and say, no, the Taj Mahal is in India. It's even higher pitch, right? India. New York is the capital of the United States. New York is the capital of the United States. No, Washington is the capital of the United States. Washington is the capital of the United States. Phonetics is the study of fun. No, sorry. There's so few times we can have fun in phonetics, though. Yeah? Phonetics is the study of fun. No. Phonetics is the study of speech sounds. If I want to correct the information, it gets an added level of pitch, an added level of focus accent, which boosts the pitch even higher. The standard sentence would be, as you've heard me say many, many times, phonetics is the study of speech sounds. Phonetics is the study of speech sounds. But when it receives focus, it's even more, even higher pitch. Right? Phonetics is the study of speech sounds, right? Is used to correct the information expressed in this example. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. All right. So just to summarize so far, we've seen two types of intonation. There's the glide, which the voice pitch falls or rises gradually throughout the pronunciation of a syllable. The other type is the step type, where the voice jumps up or jumps down from one syllable to the next. In fact, Japanese accent tends to be step accent pattern. English has both glide and step, and there's some languages that have primarily glide. Primarily? Well, definitely. I don't know of a language that has only glide. I should look that up. But you can see that which um, pattern, whether it's glide or step, depends on the stress pattern of the accented word. If it's a two-syllable word and stress is on the first syllable, you'll get a step accent pattern. If it's a two-syllable word but stress is on the second syllable, then you'll get the glide accent pattern on the final syllable. And then we've seen the two accents, either rising or falling. And this depends on the grammatical information that's expressed. If it's a statement or a WH question, we'll get falling accent. If it's a yes/no question, we get rising accent.